Hello everyone, welcome to another Inkarnate live stream. Today we're going to be covering the top 10 world map fails. That means the top 10 mistakes that I kind of see users making over and over again when putting together a world map with the fantasy world style. So go ahead and buckle up. We're going to be covering these 10 issues. If you have one of your own world maps made with the fantasy world style, go ahead and open up that map and we can go ahead and maybe you can follow along, kind of make some of these changes yourselves and take some notes because, hey, you know, people make mistakes. It's okay. I make mistakes. So let's go ahead and cover those. Now there's going to be 10 and I'm not going to be covering, I'm not going to be going in any particular order, but we're going to go from 10 to 1. We're going to cover each one of these mistakes and there's no map to clone this time. Like I said, totally recommend you kind of open up your own map and then kind of take a look at your world map and see if you've made these same mistakes. So it's going to go from 10 to 1. The first mistake that I commonly see is just not using the grid. The grid is your biggest ally when you're trying to put together distances, scale, you're trying to figure out from one place to another. This happens often. Players or users will ask, DMs will ask, hey, how do I determine that this city is 200 miles from this city, right? And the grid is going to be that trick. So if you want to know the difference, we want to know, how do I make it so that this right here is going to be 200 miles? Then you would need to make sure that you set the grid at a specific set or measurement. So it could be 200 square miles or 200 square kilometers, depending on the measurement that you want to use. The grid is going to be your ally, right? Let's say that this is 500 square feet and you wanted to have a 500 square foot or maybe a 50 mile square or 50 mile forest, then you would know how big a forest is. This is important if you're a DM because, hey, you need to know the distances between two locations. You need to know the scale that you're working with. All those important. So definitely when you're starting out your map, use the grid. It's super helpful. Always use that grid. All right, number 9. What's going on next here? And number 9, we're going to have unrealistic coastlines. Unrealistic coastlines are caused by when you're making your landmasses, you make a giant blob first, and then you start putting down all your stamps. The way to make more realistic coastlines is to do that second pass. That means you're going to be doing another pass with a smaller brush around your coastlines to give it more definition. So if you want to make inlets, you want to make archipelagos, channels, things like that. So what I do is I go to the brush tool, make sure it's the subtract mode. I'm going to use the circle brush because the edgy brush has limitations on how small it can get. So use that circular brush. I'm going to set it to size 7. Okay. And what you can do is you can go in and make archipelagos or islands. Let's say I want to make this into an island right here. Let's say that I want to create an inlet or a bay like this. Okay, or if I want to make maybe some, you make sure you get all that stuff out there too. You can use a larger brush if you want. 7 is just a decent size. Let's say that I want to have like a series of islands up here. Just take that smaller brush, circle brush. Again, don't use an edgy brush because again, there are limitations on the size. And so if you want more realistic coastlines, go in with that smaller brush and just kind of carve out the more detailed parts of your landscape. Inlets, horns. Maybe you want to make a nice large horn right here. Okay, so we have a horn right here. Maybe you want to create an island right here. Right, so there's a lot of different things that you can do. Just make that smaller brush. Normally I save this part for a little bit later. I've already put all the stamps down and I want to do my second pass and kind of just clean up to make some interesting shapes. Horns, archipelagos, islands, you name it. Just take that smaller brush and that will kind of help to kind of make those edges not look so kind of flat. Add a little bit more character to it. Take a smaller brush, hit up those edges, go around it. That's going to be the trick. Number 8. Another common one that I kind of see is inconsistent stamp scale. And inconsistent stamp scale just means that you're having maybe one stamp that's at 100% and another stamp that's at 20. Okay, and this inconsistency can be weird. So what I recommend doing to fix that problem is to set the scale for all of your terrain this terrain scale is set, this mountain range is set to 80, then all the other terrain stamps should also be set to 80. Trees, craters, hills, other mountains, all those other things should be at that same scale. Then when it comes to put down your POIs, that's your points of interest, river or towns, villages, capitals, then you want to set a scale specifically for those stamps, okay? Because it's okay if you want to have your POIs be at a different scale from your terrain, because that depends, it's a style issue that you need to decide. Do you want to have large POIs with detail that are bigger than the terrain? Then make sure that all the POIs are at the same scale, so that way you're not having this varying wild scale discrepancy in all your stamps. So super important, do not go ahead and change a rapid change in scale, because then the line work and the stamps become thicker, became thinner. So stick with scale consistency. Pick the terrain size that you want to pick for the stamps. Pick the POA size that you want, okay? Otherwise, you're going to have some issues there. Let's go back up. Number 7. Another one that happens, I see with a lot of maps, is mixing map styles. And it's okay, technically, to mix map styles, but there are some wildly differences between the map styles. Fantasy World or Fantasy Regional is more detailed, while Fantasy World is at a smaller scale, so there's less detail. So I don't recommend that you, when you're making a world map, that you take a stamp from Fantasy Regional or from Watercolor Cities or whatever, and then put it onto the map, because there's a inconsistency in that art. You'll notice that the art for, let's say, this tower right here is more simple. The line work is a little bit thicker, while Fantasy Regional has way more detail. So, and it's okay to do this if you want. Just make sure that you use some kind of filter, or you're going to have to change it HSBC wise to make it fit more with the other ones. So I don't recommend crossing styles unless you are going to change things HSBC wise with the stamp, or if you're going to use some kind of filter to make sure that all the stamps have some kind of coherence to them, some kind of similarity to each other. Otherwise, it looks a little out of place and kind of weird. So if you do have mixed matching styles, go ahead and just switch out and stick with a single style that you're going to work with, unless you are kind of a power user and you know how to manipulate the stamps to work within all the different styles. So definitely try to stay within one style if possible, because it's really not helpful. Another example right here, notice that I'm using icons right here, and then for this I'm using this orc kind of more isometric like one. That just, there's an inconsistency there. So instead, maybe use orc stamps, either use this isometric style with the color on it, or only use this icon style for your POI. So pick one or the other. Don't kind of mix and match, because they are very inconsistent and they look kind of weird together. Okay, let's go with number 6. What's next? Number 6 is flat oceans. I see this a lot when a lot of people, when they're making their map, is they just pick one flat color or texture for their ocean, and that's okay, but it doesn't show depth. It doesn't really show whether this ocean is more cold or more warm, and it's an easy one to fix. You just need to take another ocean color that's darker than the other one. So if I just type in sea or ocean, or whichever one you want, and there's a darker color, go ahead and click that darker one, set to BG, because hey, your land you want to make with the add mode of the mask tool, and with the water, it's going to be that BG layer or the default layer. Okay, so what you'll do is bring the size up fairly big and then drop the opacity down. 30, in between 30 and 40 is good. And then what you want to do is, just like when you think of surgery, when you don't want to accidentally touch the edge of the landmass. So the deeper that an area is, the darker it's going to be. So if you want some darker, deeper ocean, maybe it's colder, then go in, and then the further away it gets from land, obviously the deeper it's going to be. And right away you'll notice that it already has a bit of a difference, because you don't want your ocean to be that just flat one color. Give it a little bit of depth. Show where the darker regions are, where it's deeper. Show where maybe it's colder or warmer. Go in between here, like this. And it's just a couple strokes. Just make sure that it's darker. Apply more the further away you get from land. That's it. Already that kind of makes your ocean pop out just a little bit more, giving it a little bit more character, right? Let's go at number 5. What's next? Texture and stamp blending. And there are two things that I mean by texture and stamp blending. When it comes to texture blending, I'm specifically talking about blending two different biomes. One of the most contrasting biomes is a frozen or a kind of a tundra, and you want to show that there's some melting and thawing going on between maybe your frozen area and then maybe where there's grass and dirt. And one of the things you can do is use this snow alpha texture. And the snow alpha texture is not in the fantasy world style. It's actually in a different one. Let me just type in snow real quick and I'll show you where to find this snow alpha. This is going to be in Parchment World, but there are also some other snow ones in the fantasy battle map. But I'm going to use the Parchment one. And then you're just going to select that one. Make sure it's set to FG layer where your land is, and just kind of go over. Let's go ahead and bring it all the way up to 100%, by the way. And just go lightly over where your Arctic line is, where your frozen area is. And don't forget to go over that whole like this. And what you're doing is creating some transition to where maybe the snow is thawing a little bit. That's one way that you can like blend biomes. This is the easy one. But what about, let's say, between desert and grass? This one's pretty easy. A smaller brush, make it small, make sure the softness is all the way up, and then drop the opacity down to around between 40 and 50, and then just single clicks to create this diffusion. So I'm going to single click like this, and you'll notice that these little yellow dots start creating a transition between the sand and that one. It's the same concept. Let's say that if that sandy area was actually brown, you would take that same brown texture and do single click dots to diffuse that very clear line of yellow or brown or whatever the color is. Notice that I've got some brown right here. If I just do single clicks like this along that edge, it begins to kind of blend those together. So that's what I mean by blender texturing. But there's also another type of blending that's important, and that is stamp blending. Notice that these stamps right here are kind of this brown color, and they kind of just pop out against that green. And so you could, one, use a brown texture and just kind of go underneath like this to make sure that that's blended in a little bit better. Like this, you can do this. It seems like it's a little bit brighter. And if that doesn't do it enough for you to try to blend using texture, the other trick that you can use is to use the luminosity blend mode. And that way it's going to pick up whatever color is beneath it. So if I take this mountain right here with the luminosity blend mode on, and I moved it over to the yellow over here, we'll copy and paste that, move it over here. You'll notice it's picking up the same yellow behind it, right? If I put it over here, it's going to look blue. If I put it over here, it's going to look kind of this different color. Just know that when you do use the luminosity blend mode, it's going to pick up the color, but it's not going to pick up how bright or how dark it is. So you might have to do some minor adjustments to make sure that it fits in. Now, if you want to avoid all of that, particularly with mountains, just use the mountains in the fantasy world style that have a clipping mask. Okay, if you use that instead, then you won't have to worry about it. If I click this down right here, it's going to pick up whatever texture is on the FG layer. So if I put it right here, you'll notice it's picking up that green texture right there. If I put it here, it's picking up that brownish texture. If it's going to be on this red right here, it's going to pick up that red. So you could just use those mountains instead if you want to avoid that part of blending. All right, let's go ahead and do another one. What's kind of next? What do we have next here? Let's go with number 4. So blending is not as complex as you think. It's pretty easy stuff. Let's go with number 4, and that is text consistency. It's the same thing when you had that stamp inconsistency. You can also have a text inconsistency. I see this on so many maps. It's where people think that they have to use a varying types of text to kind of make each place individual looking because you're using different types of fonts and colors. This can be confusing to the viewer's eye. So what you might want to do instead is, just like you chose a specific type of stamp scale or a different stamp style, do the same thing with the text. If you want to have maybe the region of an area, let's say you're labeling a region, then maybe you want to pick a specific color, a specific font. It's curved, and then maybe you want to use the same font to maybe show a place, but instead of using the curve, sure, you're trying to label a POI, make sure that you use the same font, but you can change the size, you can change the lines of text, how many lines there are. You can change that. Just make sure there's a consistency. POIs should have the same type of text font. If you're making a region, make sure all the regions are labeled with the same font, same color, same size. If you're labeling the ocean, make sure you use the same color, font, and size. Okay? Don't go crazy on all the different types, because that kind of labeling is, again, it's confusing information. So make sure there's some coherency, some similarity between the text, so that way you're not looking at this map chaos on your map. Let's go ahead and keep going. So text, not complex. Let's go with number 3. And the next one is going to be flat landmasses. Whenever you're putting down a map, sometimes you're looking at it and you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute, why is it so flat? What can I do to make my map seem like there's a little bit more height and depth and dimension to it? And the trick is cliffs. Cliffs are an absolute must. And I know that cliffs, because you have to place them individually, and it's kind of monotonous, but hey, putting down cliffs is super important. And there's a trick to putting down the cliffs. You just need to line them up with where the line work is on the mountains. So if I take a cliff, let's go ahead and just select a cliff real quick. If I select a cliff, one moment, and I'll show you how to line them up. Let's open up cliffs. So if I have a cliff like this and I want to place it down somewhere, you can put it up against the line work. So let's say that I have a mountain over here and I want to line up the line work right along here against the edge. And you would kind of expect cliffs to be along the mountains there. Line them up right there with that line work. And it's going to look like these cliffs kind of have, these mountain ranges have a ledge to it. You can put another one right here. Right? So just line up the cliffs with the line work. And also they can just be random too. They don't have to be necessarily lined up with other mountains. You could just take a mountain range or take a cliff. Let's go ahead and put one right next to this one right here. Just open this up, flip it. Let's say I want to put one right here. And so I kind of create like a little canyon right here if I want. So placing down cliffs is a great way to kind of show depth. Yes, it's time consuming because you have to place them individually in certain places, but hey, if your map is looking flat, the cliffs is the way to do it. Watch what happens if I turn off my cliffs real quick, and you'll kind of see the difference without. Right? It'll look just a little bit flatter, but without those cliffs. Okay, oopsie, for some reason my cliffs are not going down to 0. 1 second, there you go. You can see the difference. It just looks, in my opinion, a lot flatter. So definitely use cliffs to your advantage to allow for more elevations to make it look bigger. That's definitely what I recommend. Hey, first time chatter, both of you. So glad that you're both here. Thank you so much. Let's keep going. Now that you know how to add some depth, you could use those cliffs. Let's go ahead and go with the next couple ones. Let's see here. We're going to go up at the top, hit the next ones. Let's go with number 2. Hey, another first-time chatter. Hey, awesome. So glad you've been enjoying the YouTube videos. We have so many more to come. There's so much content. So I'm super excited. So number 2, overlapping stamps. So basically when I'm looking at people's maps, I do see this common error where people will have like a mountain that's kind of overlapped into the ocean a little bit. And it's not a big deal. Just before you finish your map, before it looks done to you, go back and just kind of make sure that none of your mountains are accidentally kind of sticking out in the middle. Sometimes when you're using the edgy brush, you might have a tree that's accidentally on the coastline somewhere. So push in your mountains to make sure they're on the land masses. Make sure none of if you're using the density brush and you're making a forest, sometimes trees will bleed out off into the water like that. Yeah, so just what I recommend is just that when you go to do your second pass to make your land to make your landmasses or your coastlines to have a little bit more definition to them. Look carefully as you're going around the coastlines and look for any stamps that might be bleeding over into your ocean. This happens all the time. I do this all the time, actually, and I even forget to proof to look over it. So definitely, when you do your coastlines, zoom in and look for those kind of overlapping mistakes. And there's also another kind of overlapping mistake that happens is sometimes you wanted to show that a tower was on top of a dune or on top of a mountain, and you might accidentally put the stamp behind it. So just be sure that make sure that your mountains are overlapping properly. Look carefully. Sometimes I'll see that a mountain is on top of another mountain and on top of these trees. So there's these layering inconsistencies that happen. So just make sure that when you go for that final pass to look over your map, make sure that the layering consistency is there. Look carefully right here. See how I have there's a hill right here where there's supposed to be a cliff right here, so I'll just move that hill over to here, okay? So just look for problems like that. I make this mistake all the freaking time. So just when you go to zoom in, take a closer look, and make sure that all the stamps are where they need to be. There's not any inconsistencies with overlapping. It happens all the freaking time. Very common mistake. All right, last mistake that I kind of see with people is not using filters, okay? And you may say, well, hey, filters aren't really that big of a deal. Actually, they are. Filters can mean a lot. They can set the mood and the environment for your entire map. And they can mean a lot to giving more visibility. If you're a DM or you're making maps as a private contractor and you're trying to make money selling your maps, you want your maps to pop out more so that people are like, whoa, that's different from other people's maps. So to grab attention to yourself and to help with making maps pop out more, throw down a couple filters to give it a little bit more pop. And there are a couple filters that I totally recommend. One of those is just clarity. Clarity is going to sharpen up things. It's going to make it pop out more. It's a great way to kind of bring out more color. Look how kind of more dull it is when I turn it off. I turn it back on, and it kind of pops out more. So very, very helpful to use your clarity. The other one that I recommend is, and if there's not a lot of land masses along the edges and you don't have a frame, you can totally use the vignette stamp. It's in texture. Open up the texture catalog and then go ahead and click the Inkarnate tag. Once you click the Inkarnate tag inside of the filter catalog, it's going to give you the filters for every single style, okay? Because if you don't, you're going to end up only in the single style. So go grab a vignette stamp or vignette, throw it down, let it load up for a second here. And there's a lot of different things you can do. You can push it all the way up so that the edges are dark. And by putting a dark silhouette or vignette around the edge, you're putting a lot of light and focus on the land masses and more in the center of the map, making it pop out more. You can even play with blend modes to see what they kind of do. I like to sometimes use overlay, because overlay just kind of adds kind of this burn-like effect to the darker areas and makes the areas a little bit more brighter. But we'll go with normal for now. And the last other thing that I like to do is to throw down some kind of filter that's going to throw down some artifacts on the map. So you could throw down old paper, a grain, paper tear. All of those are great ones. Let's go throw down old paper. Let's say that you want your map to have some more artifacts to it. It still looks kind of flat to you. So you pick old paper right here, and then you're going to choose that overlay blend mode. Oh yeah, Spotlight's another great choice, by the way. Yeah, absolutely. And then I like to change it to repeat so the artifacts aren't quite as massive. Bring the size down. And if you want, you can bring it all the way down to -5. And it won't, that means that only the FG and the BG layer will be affected by the filter, but the stamps will remain unaffected. So that's one thing you can use. If you don't like that artifact look, then change it. Maybe change it to what another user said earlier by throwing down a spotlight. Okay, you throw down a spotlight, it's going to create a light in the center, causing it to pop out more. Okay, so anyway, these are the top 10 things that I've noticed. Definitely go back to your own maps. Make sure that you're not making these mistakes. Sure, a lot of map making is interpretive, but my suggestion is that you follow these 10 things and right away your maps will probably be just a little bit better. So follow those 10 things. Make sure there's consistency. Make sure that things look good and they pop out. And that way you can get more clients if you're a private contractor, or if you're a DM and you just want better world maps for your campaign, something you got some eye candy for your players, right? Everyone wants that stuff. All right, well, hey, that's it. Those are the top 10. We've got a castle stream coming up next week, next Wednesday, and it's going to be a whole series on castles throughout kind of history. And we're going to be starting with the very first kind of castle, which is a hill fort, and then we'll kind of move on from there to all the different types of castles that you can make, all going to be in the fantasy battle mat style. Hey, thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate you being here in this stream. I'll see you next week. In the meantime, please stay safe and healthy. Auf Wiedersehen, my friends. Merry map making.